Well, what's up, everybody? It is Sunday, October 7th, and it's about 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this is new for the MMA Ratings podcast because we all saw what happened last night. UFC 229 ended in nothing short of chaos. And after a few hours of thinking about it, listening to all the all the commentary and all the conversations that were going on, I kind of decided just to sit back and give some, I'm not insight, just give some thoughts on what occurred last night at UFC 229. I mean, if you're not aware, I'm sure pretty much everyone's aware because I've been stopped multiple times today already asked about it. But you saw I'm just going to call it a riot that broke out once Khabib Nurmagomedov submitted Conor McGregor in the fourth round of their lightweight championship fight at UFC 229 in Las Vegas. We saw the outcry and the foolishness that basically occurred from there. So, what I want to do is to talk about each angle that I see looking at this situation, because I think that there's a lot to kind of talk about here, after having time to sleep on it, having time to kind of look back at it again. I think that we need to kind of continue the conversation about what occurred, because I'm seeing a lot of different narratives come out, and some of them are disturbing, some of them are laughable, some of them are foolish, but it's an interesting time, and it's always interesting to listen to commentary when situations like this occur, because it's very telling about the narrative that's going to be presented about the individuals involved. This always Situations like this make me think of the situation that happened with the Pacers and Ron Artest and Steven Jackson back in the NBA. And I don't even remember how many years ago that was, but it makes me think of situations like that. It makes me think of the frequent fights in hockey, the frequent fights in MLB baseball. All of these situations kind of make me. I like to listen to the commentary and the narratives around it, because it's really telling about the people involved and about the people who are reporting and creating the narrative and telling the story of history, that history will look back and say, okay, this is what occurred and this is how we thought of everyone around that time. So I just wanted to take some time this morning to add my voice to that conversation, because I think that there's some angles that are being missed, some questions that aren't being asked. And yeah, I just want to kind of jump on into that. 1 second. Trying to tweet out this link. Funny because I didn't intend on doing this. I didn't intend on putting a show together. I don't have an agenda. I don't have anything of the like. I just kind of quickly thought about this a second ago, let my team know, threw on a computer, jotted down some quick notes, and yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about this, because there's a lot to kind of break down, and I want to look at every single person involved in this situation. So, first person I want to talk about is Khabib Nurmagomedov. So, yes, Nurmagomedov went in there and he did exactly what he said he was going to do. He smashed Conor McGregor, dropped him in the second round, took him down easily in the first, maintained that top position. Didn't really do too much with it at the end of the first, but he took him down, held that position, dropped him in the second. Looked like he kind of took the third round off, and McGregor got some work done in the third round. Also committed a couple of fouls, and then in the fourth, uh, Habib came out with intention on finishing the fight, took him down, took his back, and got the kind of face crank, face crush. If anyone who's ever trained knows what it's like to just have someone squeeze on your face, you know it sucks. And you saw Connor try to fight through it, but he eventually had to tap to the pressure. So that's all well and done. You know, Schwan and I are going to talk about that from a fight breakdown on Thursday when we have our 100th episode of the MMA Ratings podcast. We'll talk about that. We'll give you full analysis there. That's Schwan's wheelhouse. He's the best at doing that. But I want to talk to you about what occurred after. So immediately after the submission that Khabib didn't initially let go. Herb Dean had to tap him a couple times to get him to let go of the choke, but he did let go. He stood over Conor for a second and then turned towards where Conor's team was, uh, where their corner section was. He throws his mouthpiece against the cage, runs and jumps over the cage directly toward Dylan Dennis, and basically a brawl ensues there. They're shoving between him and Dennis. Everyone's pulled apart, and Dennis is separated by security and police. Khabib's separated by security and police. You see there's video of them being drug apart. Then what immediately happens after that is two individuals of Khabib's corner jump into the cage. Now, one guy jumped on top of the cage, and Conor actually jumped on top of the cage and took a swing at him before jumping back down. That individual, they've both been named at this point in time. I can't actually pick out where their names are right now, but they've both been named at this point in time. But that individual jumped down and confronted Conor in the cage. And the second individual, you can look at the video and see he's in a red shirt. He jumps over the cage and gets a couple of shots in on Conor as well, before security rushes into the cage and separates them there. So you have that madness going on. Bodies are being pulled apart, and Luke Rockhold and Daniel Cormier are trying to talk Khabib down, because he's eventually brought back into the cage, and you see that situation unfolding. So we are watching. I mean, everybody's watching. Everyone's there. Everyone's watching around the world. They're watching the situation unfold, and you see that both parties are kind of separated in the cage. First, Conor was kept in the cage, and Khabib was kept out, and Khabib was brought back in. Conor was escorted out. And you see Khabib calling for his title belt. Dana White tells him he's not putting the belt on him because basically he feels like the crowd, which was a wildly pro-McGregor crowd. I mean, to the point where people were booing anytime that Khabib got a takedown. It was wildly pro-McGregor. And Dana is saying that he doesn't want to put the belt on Khabib because individuals will start throwing things into the octagon. Well, I understand his trepidation there. I understand his concern. I questioned it because people were going to be throwing things anyway. As you saw when they were walking Khabib out, people were throwing stuff at him to begin with. So that was going to occur regardless of the fact we're way beyond that now. But Khabib was escorted from the cage, and we're left with a situation where Bruce Buffer is inside the cage by himself, announcing the winner. And almost like, it's so surreal. We've never seen anything like that happen. You can talk about the situation that happened back in Strikeforce in Nashville when the Diaz brothers and Jake Shields jumped in to confront Mayhem Miller, and that brawl broke out. You can talk about that, but that was on such a small scale compared to this, because I don't even remember if there was a title on the line. It was Strikeforce. I think it was a weekday that occurred. I mean, it was so much more of a smaller scale than what we saw last night. I mean, in anything, in my opinion, the closest comparison to this is what occurred with Ron Artest, Steven Jackson, and that fan years ago in Indiana. So that's probably the closest thing. While Dylan Dennis is not a fan or not a paying patron, you know, he is a member of Conor McGregor's team. It still was a situation where people could have been hurt, people could have been injured in that situation. So for Khabib, the way I look at this, there isn't anything good that will come from this situation. I mean, we're talking about a guy who was 27-0 now. He was a wrecking ball. He is a wrecking ball within MMA. He's one of the best guys at applying pressure, getting a takedown, and basically beating the pace out of people almost willingly in such a way that is demanding of respect. And the only word you can really think of is domination when you talk about that. Khabib is that guy, and this was an opportunity for him to siphon off potentially some of the star power that Conor McGregor had built over these last 6 years or so, if that long. So it hasn't even been that long, but Khabib was in a position to become that guy, to take off a little bit of his star power and apply it to his own name. Unfortunately, many people are describing him as the villain coming out of UFC 229, and I get that. I understand. He jumped over the cage, started a fight, and basically mayhem ensued. And probably one of the more interesting things, if you watched the post-fight press conference, people are asking him about the situation, and he's getting agitated, like, why are you asking me about this? I did what I did. No one asked him being McGregor, no one asked about the comments he made about Nurmagomedov's religion, the comments he made about Nurmagomedov's family, the comments he made about Nurmagomedov's nation or countrymen. No one's asking about that. And listening to Nurmagomedov talk about it, it's almost as if he's like, this is normal to me. Snitches get stitches, for lack of a better term. And when people talk, it's almost as if he's like, why are you surprised I did what I did? Because he's been talking for so long. And that speaks to the cultural differences that I personally see in this situation that I don't think are being talked about by anyone that I've heard from a commentary standpoint I've listened to since last night. Yes, Nurmagomedov should not have done X, Y, Z. It lacked sportsmanship. It lacked professionalism. That's not something that the UFC wants to be known for this moment or any moment in the future. That is not a situation that you want to look back on and say went down under your watch. It's funny, anytime Mike Tyson can laugh and tweet about how this is worse than the situation that he's caused, it says a lot. So there's nothing positive for Nurmagomedov coming out of the situation. Will he be stripped? I don't know. Some people are calling for that. I don't totally agree. But will he be stripped? Potentially. Will the INSAC levy a fine against him? Probably. I was reading that he was supposed to make $2 million in base pay for this event, but his salary has been withheld at this point in time. Conor's been paid, but Nurmagomedov's salary his purse has been withheld. Will he be suspended? Probably so. I would not be surprised if he was suspended until this time in 2019. So all of those situations and consequences, I understand, and I'm not fully upset with. You should be punished for your actions. So if he is hit with heavy fines, heavy sanctions, heavy punishment, then not disagreeing with it. He stepped over the line, he jumped outside of the cage, and he caused a situation that should not have occurred in this sport or any other sport for that matter. And I am totally okay with him being punished. But that is a key term there, because as I want to talk about punishment, I want to turn the conversation to Conor McGregor, who I think is the next individual that we need to talk about in this matter. Now, Conor went out there and he had his moments. He rocked Nurmagomedov with a stiff uppercut. I think in the third round, he hit him with that. He had some good takedown defense against the open cage early in the fight. He also had some good takedown defense in the third, getting wrist control, even though he was grabbing inside the gloves, grabbing the cage with his hands, grabbing the cage with his fence, grabbing the fence with his toes. He kneed Nurmagomedov in the head when they were both down. So, I mean, all of those situations you got to talk about. You can't ignore. But Conor had his points. He had his points of his positive moments in this fight. We have always known that he's had cardio issues, and they continue to creep up. Wrestling in MMA is probably one of the most physically demanding and physically draining aspects of this fight game. And if you are fighting someone who can make you wrestle for 10, 15 minutes, maybe longer, you're going to struggle if you cannot keep up that pace with them. And we saw here that McGregor struggled with that. And it's always been one of the questions that people talked about when he was coming up. How would he fight a wrestler? How would he deal with someone who could wrestle? How could he deal with someone who could apply pressure? And we saw what would occur. He landed some great shots. He had some great moments there, but it just wasn't enough to get the job done before he was forced to submit in the fourth round. All that being said and done, McGregor's still one of the greatest strikers in the game. He's still one of the greatest fighters, regardless of weight class in the game right now. We cannot talk about the chaos that happened. I'm going to continue using that word just because I love the term chaos. But we cannot continue talking about that situation without talking about the part that Conor had to do with this. He is a fantastic fight promoter, fantastic entertainer, fantastic businessman who knows how to take situations and leverage them into financial gain. He's done that continuously, some of that with the UFC's backing, and he continues to do that very well. But there is a line in fight promotion that I think cannot be crossed. I remember growing up when boxing was still like the number one combat sport in the world. It still kind of is, depending on who you ask. And I believe Ricardo Mayorga, I can't remember who he was going to fight, but I remember he snatched the Puerto Rican flag and threw it on the ground and stomped on it. And my father, being Puerto Rican, was incensed. He was like, doing something like that causes people to die. Like my dad is probably one of the calmest guys I know at this point in time, and seeing the rage on his face from that one situation is a prime example, I think, of when it comes to how people take these cultural references that are brought up in sports. And that brings me to the conversation about Conor, because while he did such a fantastic job promoting this fight, and while he spoke about some things that are 100% true, he spoke about, I had Michael Russell, Schwan and I had Mike Russell on the show this past Thursday to talk a little bit about his work on Ali Abdelaziz and some of the issues and transgressions he's had throughout his career. But looking at what Conor said and looking at what he presented as quote-unquote fight promotion, I'm not saying he crossed the line. I'm not saying this is a situation that needs to be policed, but you cannot look at what he said and look at what he did and not say that, maybe this had something to do with the situation. Daniel Cormier's tweet last night after the situation was probably the one that was one of the ones that was most spot on to me, where he said that for some people, this is not about promotion. This is about their life. You can't talk about someone's religion. You can't talk about someone's family. You can't talk about someone's nation and expect them to just let that wash over them. This isn't him hyping up a fight with Floyd Mayweather. Floyd being someone who understands how it is to be gregarious and say whatever you need to say to get eyeballs. Khabib Nurmagomedov is not that guy. If you look at Khabib's eyes when this whole situation was unfolding, you could see the rage in his face, and that's probably like the most telling part of it to me. McGregor talking about his religion, talking about his nation, talking about his father, and calling him a coward for being linked to Kadyrov and those other situations. That is not something you want to poke, because that is a part of the country that is totally different than what you and I, being Americans, understand. It's not something that is easily dismissive when you talk about those groups. We don't know what Nurmagomedov's family is going through or has to go through living in that area, and seeing and listening to McGregor stroke those racial issues, stroke those national those religious issues, gives me pause. And this is not the first time. Remember what McGregor said about Aldo before their fight for the featherweight title. Think about what McGregor said about Rafael dos Anjos before that fight fell apart. Think about what McGregor said about Floyd Mayweather before that fight, and then what he said leading into this fight. This is a trend. This is something I've been saying for a long time. Yes, it's fight promotion, but do you have to touch upon things that can cause this to happen? Nurmagomedov and his crew are not people to be toyed with. They poked a bear. We joke about Nurmagomedov wrestling with bears growing up. They poked the bear, and the bear got out the cage and acted a damn fool. Dylan Dennis, this is the reason why Dylan Dennis's propensity to speak out, to be a trash talker, to be someone who's trying to be an entertainer and to be famous, quote unquote, that's the reason why he was kicked out of Marcelo Garcia's gym. Like, look back at Marcelo's comment when that occurred, I think last year, when he asked him and Munchie to leave. This situation speaks to the exact reason why he was asked to leave that gym. Dennis, love him or hate him, He's a great prospect on the Bellator roster. Ever since he's been linked to Conor, these types of behaviors have continued to creep out of him. So that's a whole nother narrative. That's a whole nother conversation. I don't want to spend too much time on Dennis, but you cannot look at this situation and say that Conor is completely is completely, like, his hands are completely clean. And I'm going to talk about Dana in the UFC next, but like I said, I'm all here for fight promotion. I'm all here for guys being outspoken, drawing attention to fights, because let's be real here. This event was, I think, projected to do almost 2 million buys. It at least did 1 million, I can tell you that. All of that was because of the star power that Conor McGregor has. That star power has come from him being so outspoken, so boisterous, and such an act that people want to see. I understand that. I get that, and I totally I understand with his star power. I understand that he is box office. I get that through and through. But at some point in time, we have to ask if there's a line, and if his continued use of language and terms that can cause pause like this are worth the end result, and how much, and what is the return on that. They are looking at a situation now where, we don't know what's going to happen next with him. McGregor was already talking about a rematch. I doubt that'll be anytime soon. Like I said, I think Nurmagomedov will be suspended for a year. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But you have to wonder, at what point in time does he dial it back and say enough is enough? And what point in time do you say, like, his actions are just too much? And that brings me to the third pillar in this conversation, and that's Dana White in the UFC. Now, listening to what Dana has had to say, I listened to his interview with, I think it was Megan O'Leary, after during the post-fight show. I'm going to listen to his post-fight press conference if he did any. I'm interested to see how long his outrage lasts, because he was outraged about Conor McGregor until probably the next day, when Conor McGregor attacked the bus in Brooklyn, through the dolly through the window. He was outraged for about a day, but he never punished McGregor. And this is a continuing trend. We remember when McGregor ran up on the cage, and I think it was Mark Goddard had to admonish him and tell him to go away, that he's not supposed to be in that era. I think Artem Lobov was fighting at the time, and McGregor basically ran up to the cage in the area where he's not supposed to be, and Mark Goddard told him to leave. We know that McGregor jumped over the cage at the Bellator event in Ireland and ended up putting his hands on Mark Goddard. Nothing happened with that. We saw the dolly throwing incident. Nothing happened with that. So all of these situations occurred, and Dana White and leadership within the UFC did not punish McGregor in any way, shape, or form. They took him forever to strip him of his titles when he didn't want to defend them, when he was looking for other business ventures at his own volition. I'm totally okay with that. I'm all about prize fighters getting the biggest prize that they can. But this is the same Dana White that cut Anthony Johnson for missing weight. This is the same Dana White that cut Paul Daly for punching Josh Koscheck after the final bell. This is the same Dana White that pushed Jason High, that cut Jason High after he pushed the ref after a questionable call in the cage. This is the same Dana White that has no problem dropping the hammer on some fighters, but allowing McGregor to do whatever he wants. And I get it. Different individuals get different treatment. I'm not saying that we're going to act like that's not the case here, because it is. But at what point in time do you rein this in? When do you say enough is enough, and you have to have a crucial conversation about some about these individuals' behavior that led to situations like what we saw last night. And what's interesting is this, Klaus. I've been talking to someone about it, and I think Luke Thomas talks about this often on his outlets. The UFC has to be careful because they don't want to punish, and I use punish in air quotes, athletes when they do things outside the cage. They don't want to punish them in the way that employers would punish employees. Because what happens is that opens up the door for these fighters to say, hey, not only are you putting us in uniforms, not only are you subjecting us to USADA testing without any of our input, now you're punishing us outside of the cage. You are treating us like employees, and that opens up a door for a lot of action against the UFC. So you have all of those different situations that are kind of mixing into this one big pot. But you have to question Dana White and co. and ask, what is their part in this? At what point in time do they say, okay, enough is enough, we have to get this under wraps? If you think for any moment that the footage from this event will not be used in a future fight promo or anything along those lines, you're out of your damn mind. Look how quickly it took them to take the footage from McGregor throwing the dolly through the bus window and use that to promote this fight. If you think they won't do the same thing with this, you're out of your mind. A rematch between McGregor and Khabib would do ridiculous numbers. If this fight, if UFC 229 didn't do 3 million, a rematch between the two would. I totally believe that. But I continue to question the leadership within the UFC, starting with Dana White. The reason being is, at what point in time do you say enough is enough, and you look at the way you allow individuals like Conor McGregor to behave, and the way that they support that, the way that they allow that to occur? Do you say, okay, well, what he brings in is worth much more than what we would lose if we told him to tone it down? Do you say that? Okay, no problem. Say it and let everybody know. Let it be known that it is what it is. Or do you continue to feign outrage like he did last night? Do you feign outrage and move on to the next one? Or do you feign outrage or do you show outrage towards some fighters but let Conor do whatever he's going to do? No one. It's just fun. It's real funny because Brendan Schaub was talking about this all week for the last 2 weeks. He's like, something's going to happen at this event, and I'm not the biggest Brendan Schaub fan, but he's been talking about it over and over again, saying something's going to happen, something's going to happen, something's going to happen, and something did happen. There were people fighting at the weigh-ins. If you saw the videos there were people fighting outside the arena last night. There's video of that all over the internet. This is exactly why they didn't allow fans inside for that pre-fight press conference on that Thursday. I think it was September 29th. This is exactly why they didn't do all of that. And we saw what would occur. Brendan Schaub's been calling it for weeks. So no one should really be surprised. We should be surprised, but no one should be too surprised. So you have to wonder, at one point in time, does leadership within the UFC say, okay, enough is enough. We need to rein this shit show in, because we cannot allow fighters like McGregor to get too big for their britches and play their part in situations like this. Khabib is a huge reason why. He's the reason why this situation got out of hand last night. His actions were deplorable. His actions were uncalled for. They were unsportsmanlike. They were unprofessional. All of those terms you can use, but you cannot look at what Conor McGregor has done in the last few years, the way he promotes his fights and the way he talks about his peers in the cage, and not say, okay, hold on. Some of these narratives and some of these situations, calling Floyd Mayweather's bodyguards monkeys, telling Floyd Mayweather to dance for him, talking negative about Rafael dos Anjos because he moved to America to make a better way for his family, talking about riding into Jose Aldo's favela and killing everybody that's not suitable to work. All of those different narratives that he's talked about I'm not saying we should say, okay, families and religion are are out of the question when it comes to fight promotion, but you can't do that with some people, and Khabib Nurmagomedov is one of those guys. I'm sorry. Kevin Lee, you can probably talk shit to all day, every day, and Kevin Lee will give it back to you, and it'll be all good at the end of the day. But Khabib Nurmagomedov is not one of those guys, and it showed through and through. At some point in time, UFC and Dana need to look at what they're allowing this man to do and ask questions on what's worth it. And if they are okay drawing the line and saying, you know what, we're okay with these situations, we're okay with these outcomes, okay, no problem. Say that, but don't fake outrage. Don't feign being upset or sick to your stomach or whatever, when in reality, we know you're not. And the last pillar I wanted to talk about was what's next. It's funny, I'm seeing a lot of people talking about Nurmagomedov getting stripped of the title and the UFC putting Conor and Tony Ferguson in a situation where they would fight for the vacant belt. And again, why reward Conor for his part in this? Period. I'm not saying that Conor shouldn't be involved in the title conversation, but you have Dustin Poirier and Nate Diaz fighting in a few weeks. Take the winner from that fight, put them against Tony Ferguson, let that be the battle there. You can take Conor, have him fight someone like a Justin Gaethje sometime 2019, let them fight it out. You have so many options that you don't necessarily have to go directly back to Conor at this point in time. If they do go directly back to Conor, again, it continues to force their narrative that they recognize that he is the cash cow, and they're going to do all they can to keep him front and center. But this is going to be a situation that is it's very important to watch, because you don't want to, because it's a situation where the UFC could find themselves creating a precedent that is used against them in the future. Remember, they still have Leslie Smith and Project Spearhead pushing against them. They still have that the monopoly case that's working against them. They still have various situations that can work against them in the long term. And people watch situations like this, and their reaction to use as fodder when talking negatively about the UFC. So yeah, we just got to be careful. We just have to kind of closely watch what's going to occur next. And that's really all I got. UFC 229 was a surreal moment. I thought all I would really be thinking about would be Nick Lentz's comment about Brett Kavanaugh, or their tribute to Donald Trump with the Combatant in Chief special that they're going to put on Fight Pass. I thought that those were going to be the two biggest issues I had coming out of UFC 229, and then the main event happened, and all of that happened afterwards. So, oh man, it's just so this week is going to be crazy interesting to watch how everyone's talking about this. I cannot wait for all the Monday's talk shows, the Tuesday talk shows, the podcast this week are going to be amazing. Come back on Thursday. Of course, Shawan and I definitely want to talk about this on our 100th episode. This is a hell of a topic to have leading into our 100th episode. Shawan and I actually texted about it last night, and we had an interesting back and forth. So there's going to be that. But either way, guys, I want to thank you for listening to this special edition of our podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel via YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at MMA Ratings Net on Twitter and Instagram, same handle. I am Raphael Garcia. You can follow me at sports at rgarcia_sports and catch all of my rants about the NFL, professional grappling, etc., there. But man, UFC 229, I will remember where I was when all of this shit show went down, and it's going to be one of those moments that we don't live down. It's going to be one of those moments that we're going to look back to, just like the NBA sometimes looks back to Ron Artest and Steven Jackson jumping into the crowd. Either way, it is what it. Like, we can't do anything about it now. I'm looking forward to all the commentary and conversations that are going to occur this week. But either way, thank you for your time. I appreciate everyone who supports our show and listens to our content. And have a great week, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.